Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Here's Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. Trinidad and Tobago authorities have taken action on the Coast Guard crew involved in the recent Grenadian vessel incident. This story takes the lead in today's edition of Caribbean Perspective for Thursday, 10th March 2022. Details when we return.
Hubbard's Motor Department Mount Gay and Hubbard's Tire Bay, located at the Building Supplies compound in Grand Anse, are reminding the motoring public that another round for licensing and inspection has begun. Just arrived on new shipments of quality furrowed and torque tires to fit all makes and models of vehicles at competitive pricing. Shop early to avoid the hassle of long lines. WhatsApp them on 473-405-5482. Hubbard's, quality service, affordable prices.
Welcome back. The Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard officers from the interceptor crew who were involved in an incident that left a Grenadian captain and a crew member seriously injured have been sent on leave. More in this TTT news item.
In the Senate on Tuesday, Minister of National Security Fitzgerald Hines said preliminary interviews have been conducted with the Coast Guard personnel who were involved in the incident.
The Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard interceptor crew involved in the incident has been removed from seagoing duties until the conclusion of the investigations. Further, the assistance of an independent investigatory body from the Defense Force headquarters has been sought to carry out an in-depth investigation.
He said the local team has contacted the investigator from Grenada so that arrangements can be made to interview the crew members of the vessel, the Rainier J. He is still awaiting the required information from Grenada regarding those interviews.
Based on these initial interviews, a second round of questioning is to be undertaken with other personnel who may have pertinent information in relation to this matter.
According to a report by the Grenada Broadcasting Network, 8 crew members on the vessel were met with hostility by Coast Guard officers on March 2nd, which escalated to the assault of the crew's captain and 1 crew member. The crew member was reported to be seriously injured and required surgery.
An attorney in Barbados believes there are grounds for an LGBTQ couple to challenge Barbados's marriage laws right up to the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Attorney at law Lalu Hanuman shared his views during Monday's launch of the Intimate Conviction 2 volume, Affirming Peace, Truth and Justice for LGBTQ people at the St. Michael's Cathedral, pointing to a February ruling by the Caribbean Court of Justice that a man can be charged with raping another man in Barbados as it deemed the Sexual Offence Act gender neutral. Hanuman contends the island's marriage laws are also gender neutral, and therefore a similar case could be made for same-sex marriages to be allowed on the island.
Given that most of the Marriage Act is also gender neutral, except for that, just that one section, which I think was Section 3, which speaks about void and prohibited marriages in terms of categories, there's no other reference in that act saying that only a man and a woman can marry. It doesn't say in the prohibited or void sections that a man can't marry a man or a woman can't marry a woman. And I think if it ought to be considered a test case where an LGBTQ person approaches the magistrate to get the bans published, etc., and tries to get married to somebody of their same gender, and I'm confident it will be refused at the magistrate's court's level, but then challenge it all the way up to the Caribbean Court of Justice, and I think it could well succeed.
A challenge issued by Barbados' Prime Minister to all citizens to tear down the walls of gender equality on International Women's Day.
The issue of gender inequality is not a woman's problem, but it is an all-of-society problem, not only in its origins and impacts, but indeed, my friends, in its remedy. Respect is the greatest tool that we can employ as we go about our day-to-day lives. It is in our duty of care to one another that we will see the walls of inequality torn down. My own experience has taught me that there's nothing in this world that is insurmountable if we face the challenges together. As we celebrate today, let us be mindful of the long journey ahead, because there remains so much to be accomplished, and we know that. But bit by bit, hand in hand, day by day, we can do what it takes to erase gender inequality and to secure that sustainable tomorrow for all.
Prime Minister Motley hailed the contribution of Barbadian women at all levels of society who have stood as providers, champions, and defenders for others despite the odds. She urged women and girls to always strive for excellence.
Do not lease out space in your head to anyone and for anyone. Stay focused and never limit your ambition and never doubt your abilities. Aspire, my friends, to heights only you can determine.
Former Sustainable Development Minister in St. Lucia, Dr. James Fletcher, has called on the government to revive the energy transition program and take bold steps to reduce the country's dependence on the costly fossil fuels. Don Nicholas of the DBS News World reports.
Former Sustainable Development Minister Dr. James Fletcher says St. Lucia was well on course to achieve a reduction in electricity rates by means of a project which started some 6 years ago, designed to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. But according to him, because of the absence of commitment and political will, the project has not materialized.
All of this indicates why it is critically important that we revive our energy transition program and take bold steps to move our country away from its costly reliance on fossil fuels. We have an abundance of wind and sunshine in our country. Various reports have suggested that we have the capacity to generate as much as 40 megawatts of energy from solar photovoltaic, 36 megawatts from wind, and 170 megawatts from geothermal.
From there, Dr. Fletcher says St. Lucia can move from complete dependence on imported oil for electricity generation and transportation, none of which will affect the viability of Lucilec, which is one of the most efficient electric utility companies in the Caribbean.
By moving our transportation fleet to electric vehicles and by embarking on a coal ironing program at our seaports, we can increase the demand for electricity, which will increase Lucilec's profitability and value. For those who do not know, coal ironing entails supplying our seaports with electricity, generated, in this case, from renewable energy, and insisting that the cruise ships and other large vessels that berth at these ports switch off their oil-powered engines and take power from our ports when they berth in our ports. This helps these shipping companies to decrease their use of fossil fuels and reduce their carbon footprint, something they are under increasing pressure internationally to do. It reduces the emission of pollution from the exhaust of these ships into the air around Castries and Beaufort. It means that you and I will breathe cleaner air when these ships are docked.
Dr. Fletcher says it will also provide Lucilec with a new lucrative source of revenue. For the DBS News World, I'm Don Nicholas.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick.
The United States and Venezuelan officials met recently to discuss the possibility of easing oil sanctions, but registered very little progress in their first high-level bilateral talks in years, as Washington seeks to separate Russia from one of its key allies. Tamika Rodney of HGP Nightly News reports.
Both sides used Saturday's meeting in Caracas to present what has been described as maximalist demands, reflecting long-time tensions between the Western Hemisphere's main power and one of its biggest ideological foes. A U.S. delegation led by Juan Gonzalez, the top White House Latin America advisor, and Ambassador James Story held talks at the Miraflores Palace with Socialist President Nicolas Maduro and his Vice President Delcy Rodriguez. U.S. officials saw the meeting as a chance to gauge whether Venezuela, one of Russia's closest Latin American allies, is prepared to distance itself from President Vladimir Putin over his invasion of Ukraine.
Russian tourists trapped in Cuba are finding their way home via chartered flights on account of the crippling sanctions, which include blocked airspace access to Russian planes. Tamika Rodney again of HGP Nightly News has more.
About 900 Russians took chartered flights home from a Cuban resort town on Sunday as airspace bans imposed after Moscow's invasion of Ukraine complicated travel for tourists around the world. Dozens of countries, including European Union nations and the United States, have banned Russian planes from their airspaces as part of sanctions aimed at crippling the Russian economy. Russia retaliated by barring its airspace to multiple countries, including 35 European nations. An airport official in Varadero, a resort town near Havana, disclosed that 927 Russian passengers flew to Moscow on Sunday, and another 940 tourists will depart on Monday. Nearly 15,000 Russian and 2,000 Ukrainian tourists are presently stranded in the Dominican Republic.
And back to Barbados, that country is ranked 5th among countries in the Eastern Caribbean and French departments with the highest vaccination rates.
The findings were revealed during an event on Monday involving the Pan American Health Organization, World Health Organization, and the International Telecommunications Union. In October last year, the entities launched a public health education campaign designed to tackle the high level of misinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic and the vaccine hesitancy. Digicel was also part of the effort. PAHO, WHO's representative for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, Dr. Yetis Gibre, said his organization was pleased to collaborate with the partners in an effort to help countries attain at least 70% vaccine coverage.
The information has to continue. We have to educate. It's not only educating, but providing the right message through the right channel, as we have been doing with our partners like Digicel, ITU, and others. So it's a matter of working harder than what we have been doing. Definitely we're going to reach that target if people are receiving the messages appropriately.
Russia-Ukraine war to add to shipment woes to Jamaica and the rest of the region. TVJ's Dwayne Anderson reports.
The bombs and missiles are exploding in Ukraine, but some of the shocks are being felt in Jamaica. Chief Executive Officer of Kingston Wharves, Mark Williams, is warning that as the Russia war against Ukraine intensifies, there will be delays in the shipment of goods. During an interview with our news center, Mr. Williams explained that some of the world's largest movers of cargo recently made decisions which will negatively affect Jamaica.
It's an issue of ever-increasing cost, more delayed time in getting your goods from the supplier. Maersk and MSC, two of the world's largest shipping lines, have announced that they've suspended service to and from Russia. And, as Denzel and John made mention of, the myriad of commodities that would come through Russia, certainly for Jamaica, wheat, and certainly, if I think specifically of Kingston Wharves, we moved in excess of 450,000 cars last year, and this issue with the semiconductors. So again, the ripple effect is going to be great, but more rising costs, more delays, etc., etc.
And it's a case of one problem to another for Jamaicans who depend on the operations of the port, as the COVID-19 pandemic has also caused major supply chain issues which led to delays and a surge in shipping costs over the past 2 years. Mr. Williams admitted that unfortunately the situation with shipments will continue for an indefinite period.
We're in the middle of what I call a perfect storm. We're just getting out of the pandemic, notwithstanding China with their zero COVID policy. They're closing ports still. Issues in the U.S. at their ports with contract negotiations, and now this war in Ukraine. Severe supply chain issues. There are going to be continued delays. John and his team will have to quickly be looking at secondary markets for their inputs, stockpiling, etc., etc. So it's going to be more of the same.
Dwayne Anderson, TVJ News.
Hubbard's Motor Department Mount Gay and Hubbard's Tire Bay, located at the Building Supplies compound in Grand Anse, are reminding the motoring public that another round for licensing and inspection has begun. Just arrived on new shipments of quality furrowed and torque tires to fit all makes and models of vehicles at competitive pricing. Shop early to avoid the hassle of long lines. WhatsApp them on 473-405-5482. Hubbard's, quality service, affordable prices.
I am Eddie Frederick. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.